bring in Nile Gardiner. He is the director of the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation. And Nile, jumping right in, does President Trump's approach to President Putin compromise U.S. security at all?
Well, I have to say that the Helsinki summit was not a foreign policy success for the Trump presidency. I think there's been a great deal of negative fallout this week, both domestically and on the international stage. Without a doubt, I think that Vladimir Putin and his regime feel emboldened following that summit. A lot of U.S. allies are very unnerved. I think certainly the White House has tried to clarify some of the details of that summit. But I think the bottom line here is that the president missed a very good opportunity to stand up to Putin and his monstrous regime. He should have called out Putin over his occupation of Crimea and parts of Ukraine. He should have confronted Putin over his recent chemical weapons attack on British soil, for example. There are so many opportunities, I think, for the president to aggressively stand up to Vladimir Putin. He did not take those opportunities in Helsinki. I hope that he will do so when Vladimir Putin comes to Washington in the fall. But certainly this has been probably the most difficult week for the Trump presidency so far on the foreign policy front.
And the week is not over. I wanted you to set the stage on your take of that meeting. And now you have Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats, who was critical. He said that it was a little bit awkward to respond to the fact that he learned during breaking news, during a live interview coming via Twitter from the White House, that President Putin has been invited to come to the White House in the fall. Now, Director Coats, as we just told you, is sort of clarifying and quantifying his statement, sort of easing the blow, if you will, if it came across that way to the president. What does that say to you, that Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats, is sort of, you know, kind of not quite backpedaling, but trying to, again, soften the blow to the president? What's going on here?
Well, I think firstly that, you know, Dan Coats is doing an outstanding job, actually, and so are the U.S. intelligence services. And I think that, you know, the most important thing to bear in mind here is that the reality is the Russians try to interfere in the U.S. presidential election. The U.S. intelligence services are united in their assessment that this was indeed the case.
Let me jump in now, only because we have a short amount of time due to the breaking news. But my point is, what you're saying is that our intelligence agencies said, listen, in fact, Russia meddled into the 2016 presidential election. And then you have people watching as President Trump is not being as forceful on that matter, as you have just pointed out. And now you have the person who is in charge, the Director of National Intelligence, is sort of, again, trying to soften his statements, his critical statements against the president. What messages does that send to Russia and to our allies?
Well, I think it's vitally important that there is one single message sent by the U.S. administration that the Russians did indeed attempt to interfere in the U.S. presidential election. There should be consequences for the Russians. The United States must aggressively stand up to Moscow to ensure this does not happen again. And I think it's absolutely, you know, clear that the White House, the president himself, must be fully in sync with his own administration on this. After all, I think the Trump administration has been very robust in standing up to Putin in terms of the policies implemented. It's vital, I think, the president project exactly the same messaging here. And I think the Russians will try to exploit any difference of perception or opinion coming from the White House.
Right.
The Russians are masters of propaganda here, so they will exploit any kind of perceived division. But the reality is the Trump administration has been very, very tough on Russia, and the president just needs to reinforce, I think, the policies of his own administration.